Anthony Albanese, thanks for your time. Can I start by asking, are you satisfied Peter Slipper has not engaged in any criminal conduct?
Well, what I'm certainly satisfied is that the allegations that were made that were very specific by Mr Ashby, that Peter Slipper had handed over blank CabCharge dockets to hire car drivers, to what end is unknown, but that behaviour had occurred. Simply the documents that were provided by the Department of Finance and Administration and released by Mr Slipper last night as soon as he received them indicate clearly that that is not the case, that the dockets were filled in Mr Slipper's handwriting.
But James Ashby, in these court documents, claimed that on January 27 he travelled in a vehicle that was not obviously a taxi cab or a hire car, driven by someone identified by Peter Slipper as a friend. He says Peter Slipper signed three CabCharge...
No, that's not right, David.
That's what he says in the court documents. I'm reading from them right now.
He clearly indicated the person who is the CabCharge have been for one driver in Sydney in terms of the documentation. Mr Ashby alleged that he handed over blank CabCharge dockets to this driver.
That's right, in a car that was, I'm reading from it now, was not obviously a taxi cab, which did not have a meter or any other form of charge device, did not display in any way obvious that it was a car for hire. He says he handed over 3 vouchers. What Peter Slipper has produced last night are not CabCharge vouchers, they are the driver's dockets from a Legion cab.
No, the documents that the Department of Finance and Administration have produced and given to Mr Slipper after his request clearly indicate, because they have a number on them in terms of showing that it's a business, be it a taxi or a hire car, that they have been filled in, that you have in handwriting either city or suburbs or airport, some destination, you have in handwriting a figure for a dollar amount and a dollar amount, and they're signed. That's the documentation provided by the Department of Finance. The Department of Finance, in terms of having received this through the CabCharge system, that is what they have released last night.
But the unusual thing about these dockets, which we should point out are the driver's dockets only used when the electronic system has failed. They're called emergency dockets. They all come, or most of them come, from the same driver's receipt book. The serial numbers are in sequential order, even though some of the trips are days, weeks apart. Now, this would indicate that the electronic system only failed when Peter Slipper was in the car and these manual dockets had to be used.
No, David.
Isn't there something unusual about that?
Let's be very clear here. People aren't... the charge isn't that whether Peter Slipper or any other Member of Parliament is unusual. The charge here is that Peter Slipper engaged in fraudulent conduct and handed over blank CabCharges. What has shown by this documentation provided by the Department of Finance is that that allegation is not correct. And if that allegation is not correct, then it does draw into question some of the other statements that have been made.
Well, again, James Ashby's talking about CabCharge vouchers being handed over in a car that wasn't a taxi. Peter Slipper has produced CabCharge dockets.
No. Let's be clear, David. Peter Slipper has not produced. The Department of Finance and Administration has produced. An important point, these aren't things that have been dreamt up by Peter Slipper.
Well, no, but he's released them. He's released them, and they are dockets from the driver.
That's right.
That relate to a Legion cab.
And that is
the manual driver's dockets.
And that is the way, as you know, that CabCharges used to operate in terms of the driver would have a manual machine, and that was the only system previously why it would occur. Now
when was the last time you used one of those machines? Because it's pretty rare. CabCharge, the company says, 99% of the time their electronic system works. Only 1%, therefore, is it failed. And yet, on all of these occasions, it's failed.
So what, David? What is
There's
your point?
nothing unusual about that. There's nothing. You don't see anything unusual about that.
The charge here is not that someone has been unusual and has been old-fashioned and used an old-fashioned system. That is not what the allegation is, David. The allegation,
well, it's a system, therefore, that is open to rorting far more than the electronic system would be.
The allegation... Well, that's not the allegation either, David. The allegation.
But what I'm asking you is if there's something unusual about this.
The allegation.
We're talking about taxpayers' funds here, Minister.
Absolutely. The allegation is very clear. I know what came out in terms of the Steve Lewis article in terms of just over or a week ago. That's what I know, and I know the allegations that were made because they were in that article. What Tony Abbott's got to ask is, I note today in the Fin Review, the reports that coalition members knew this were coming. Well, what Tony Abbott has to answer...
Let's get back to what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here are the dockets that are now public.
We're not discussing... Well, what we're talking about here is the specific charges from Mr Ashby. Now, I don't know the details of how those allegations came about, but there are reports today that coalition members knew about it. Tony Abbott has been very careful in his language, where he said he didn't have specific knowledge of any allegations. What I want to know is, what did coalition members know? Did they tell Tony Abbott about any detail? Did coalition members know that this story was about to hit in the Daily Telegraph 6 days ago?
OK, but getting back to what's at hand here, and the question to you is there something unusual about the use of these manual dockets so often by Peter Slipper with amounts that the industry says are twice as much as they should be, using taxpayers' funds? Does this concern you? Some
people choose to use fax rather than emails still. That's a matter that isn't up to me to explain, with due respect. What it is the case is that there are specific allegations have been raised. They've been responded to with the Department of Finance and Administration providing the documentation that was given to them. So this is documentation as far back as January. Mr Slipper has released all of the documents for the period that were available and sent to him by the Department of Finance and Administration.
OK, so put simply then...
And they show very clearly that the allegations that were made by Mr Ashby are not correct.
So put simply, the question is, are you convinced Peter Slipper has used his taxpayer-funded entitlements appropriately?
I am convinced that the specific allegations against him are not correct.
I'm asking you whether you're convinced he's used his entitlements appropriately.
David, do I know whether Tony Abbott or Peter Slipper or Christopher Pyne or anyone else has engaged in appropriate behaviour at all times? It's not up to me to answer that, David, with due respect.
But given the irregularities, in the documents...
That's absurd.
Well, surely, given the many... the ones we just pointed out
aren't in the documents. What's in the documents is that you have receipts that have been provided by the Department of Finance and Administration. Mr Slipper has made them transparent and available for all to see. They clearly refute the very specific allegations that were made.
But surely, if there is a suspicion that taxpayers' funds have been misused by the Speaker of the House...
But upon what basis, David?
Well, on the basis that the amounts being claimed here are way over twice as much as what a normal trip would cost.
David, when you get in a Comcar... We're talking
about a Legion cab here, Minister, a Legion cab.
No, we're not necessarily at all.
Well, that's what all these receipts say, Legion cabs.
Yeah, but there are a range of subcontracting issues with regard to issues of cabs and hire cars. I wasn't in the cab, so I can't, or the hire car, I can't give details of that with due respect. All I can do is comment on the specifics. I do know that hire cars are expensive. I do know that Comcars cost you $80 if I wanted to go from the Commonwealth Parliamentary offices that are 100 metres down the road to this Sky News studio. The fare would be $80 if I were to get a Comcar.
All right. Well, if Peter Slipper now feels he can return to the Speaker's chair, will you support him in that?
Well, I'm not going to get ahead of that. Mr Slipper has said he'll make a statement later on. Mr Slipper, it's up to him as the Speaker to determine whether he goes in the chair or not. The position of speakership is not beholden to the Leader of the House or to the government or to the Prime Minister. It's something that's elected by the House of Representatives. He has been elected. He's entitled to resume the chair when he sees fit. The House of Reps will then make a judgment on it. But one of the things I do know from bitter experience, we had a situation with the Godwin-Gretsch affair where there are a whole lot of people in the gallery, including on Sky News, making all sorts of assertions on that Friday afternoon. And when it came out what the details were in terms of who knew what and who'd been engaged in those exercises, then it had a very different outcome to which people thought was going to occur prior to that difficult weekend. And of course on the Monday morning there were assertions made whereby Prime Minister Rudd and Treasurer Wayne Swan's positions were deemed to be in difficulty. We'll wait and see what occurs in terms of... We'll wait and see what happens. I've seen journos get it wrong before.
No, that's a fair cop, but I'm just asking you if there's a no-confidence motion against Peter Slipper and he's back in the chair, you won't support it?
Well, at this stage, in terms of the information that's available to the government, there is one date that's outstanding in terms of the allegation of criminal behaviour, because those receipts weren't available from the Department of Finance and Administration. But let's be clear, these receipts have to have gone through the CabCharge process. I'm not sure of all the detail of that, but clearly they go through and the originals end up with the Department of Finance Administration for processing. In terms of that, there's one date that isn't available yet due to the time lag that often occurs. One would assume that when that comes, that will be made available. We'll see whether that indicates that, just as with the other documents, they are, as Mr Slipper said, they would be in his handwriting.
All right, so a qualification there, but nothing you've seen yet to disqualify him from sitting in the Speaker's chair.
Well,
I just want to ask...
Call me old-fashioned, David. I reckon people are actually entitled to a presumption of innocence, and it's also my view, notwithstanding Mr Abbott's claims that things were known around Parliament without putting the detail on what was known around Parliament, this case, in terms of the civil case, of course, goes back to 2003. I note that was when John Howard was in office. Allegedly, reports were made to John Howard's office. Tony Abbott draws a distinction and says, that wasn't court proceedings. Well, civil court proceedings can be done by any individual against anyone.
Well, okay.
I could go down and put something in there before. And Tony Nutt...
The 2003 case, I should point out, that the witness
true.
to that video felt it was a consensual relationship. This claim is of sexual harassment. Look,
no, that's but that is very much so, David, as you'd be aware, very much a part of the case
affidavit.
In terms of the affidavit, and part of building up a case that says that action should have been taken. Tony Nutt has, of course, denied that. And certainly people should look at the facts rather than jump. There's a whole lot of rumours go around Parliament House
we're trying to look at the facts. That's what we're trying to do.
That's
Let
right.
me just ask you finally,
if
Peter Slipper does not return to the Speaker's chair, what happens with the budget? Have you spoken to Andrew Wilkie in particular, who's no longer guaranteeing supply and confidence to the government?
Well, of course, I've spoken to a range of the crossbenchers, which I tend to do. I've also discussed issues with Andrew Wilkie, as I do. Mr Wilkie, I don't discuss the private conversations I have with independents or crossbenchers, but certainly Mr Wilkie's position has been that he's inclined to support budget bills and supply to the government. I note that again this morning he reaffirmed his view that the government should serve full term.
All right, Leader of the House, Anthony Albanese, thank you.
Thanks very much, David.